Simon from Serious Wheels. It's been a while since my last video review where I mentioned I was getting a new bike. Now here it finally is. This is the Ducati Multistrada 1260S. I've had this bike now for about 5 months and purchased it myself. So let me tell you a little bit more about this bike. So obviously one of the first things you notice about any motorcycle is the way it looks. This motorcycle is in what's called the sports adventure segment. So it's an adventure bike with a sporty appeal to it. And I must say the Ducati designers have done a really nice job with the design and the looks of this bike. It's very well sculpted. There's a lot of fairing on the bike. It really has a sporty aspect to it. It's really sleek. It's definitely one of the best adventure bikes out there in terms of looks. So after you've gotten over the initial looks of the bike, when you ride the bike, the first thing you'll notice is the way the bike sounds. This bike sounds bloody awesome. The V-twin 1260cc engine gives the engine note a really deep kind of rumble to the engine. Very typical Ducati, very typical V-twin. People definitely know that you've arrived. So how does this bike ride? Well, I think the best way that I'm going to address this is to compare it to my older bike, the GS. Now, if you've seen that review, you'll know that my review of the GS was that it was a little bit on the boring side. It was a little bit too tame, too mellow, too well engineered. Now, I think this bike addresses that issue quite well. This bike is quite dynamic to ride. It's very engaging in the way that it rides, you know, both in terms of the engine and throttle response, in the way that it enters into corners, the way the power is delivered. Yeah, very exciting. The other thing about the GS that I made comparison to was the adjustability in the electronics and in the suspension. My initial criticism was that the GS didn't give you enough adjustability, you know, in terms of traction control, wheelie control, suspension preload, front and rear, things like that. And again, this bike's addressed those issues. You can independently adjust front to rear in terms of suspension stiffness, spring preload. You can adjust the traction control, the wheelie control, the power delivery independently for each of the 4 different riding modes on the motorbike. So this bike being the 1260S edition, you get the keyless start and you get the 5.5-inch LCD display. Now the display is quite busy and it really feels like that you're driving a NASA spaceship. You know, you've got all your traction control settings, your wheelie control settings, your ride mode, obviously fuel gauge, range, temperature, and everything. So yeah, it's all on there, but the dash is pretty busy. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the way that this bike rides, starting with the engine. Now, the engine is a 1260 engine, so it produces quite a lot of torque and power, which is great. But one thing, and it's very typical Ducati of the engine, is that it does not really want to produce any torque and power under anything about 3000 RPM. Under 3000 RPM, the engine just lugs and clatters about, doesn't really want to know you. So that just takes a little bit of adaptation to the way you ride. So for example, around residential roads and around intersection corners on those roads, I'm typically in first gear, you know, just so that the engine doesn't carry on and clatter about and could even potentially, you know, stall. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, the way that it rides, particularly in these kind of urban environments, is the throttle response. Now, I've ridden quite a few bikes in my time, and this bike has quite a sensitive, if not a little bit jerky, throttle response. Particularly as you're closing the throttle, the way that the throttle closes and the engine braking is quite abrupt, and again, just takes a little bit of getting used to. Now, when you're riding spiritedly, you know, on a twisty road or on the open roads, it doesn't really matter as much because you're quite decisive. You know, when you want to roll the throttle off, you start braking, you start cornering. But in urban environments where you just want to keep that throttle open a little bit, maybe close it off a tiny bit, it takes a little bit of getting used to. So are there any things that I don't like about this bike? Well, of course there is. For me though, they're mostly just little nitpicks. None of them are any deal breakers. So the first thing that I don't particularly like about this bike is its vehicle hold control. Now, my BMW before had vehicle hold control and that worked perfectly. Basically, you squeeze the brake lever enough to activate it, and then it will hold itself there indefinitely until you accelerate it off again or squeeze the brake lever hard enough again. Now, Ducati has a very similar thing with one exception, and that is the vehicle hold control only lasts for about 10 seconds. I don't know why Ducati have done this, because it just makes it really, really annoying. You know, it's really nice if you're on a slight slope and you need to, you know, fiddle with your gear or get something out of your pocket or make an adjustment, to have that, you know, have the engine running, have that vehicle hold control just holding you, and you can trust in it to do whatever you need to do before you know, get back on the road, get back moving again. But no, the Ducati won't allow for this, and you've either got to get what you need to do in 10 seconds, or you need to turn the bike off completely, or you need to have one foot on the ground, one foot on the rear brake, no hands on the handlebars while you're fiddling around doing your thing. You know, it just doesn't work. Sorry, Ducati, try to do better next time. The next thing is that I don't like is the catalytic converter. Now, it's you know, I know they're necessary for, you know, Euro 5 emissions and stuff, but you know, it's heavy, it's ugly, it contributes to the way the bike gets really hot when you're not moving along very fast. It contributes to the jerky throttle response that I spoke about earlier, so I don't really like it. And also, you know, if you wanted to improve the sound of the bike, normally what people would do is just buy a slip-on exhaust, but in this case the slip-on exhaust would do next to nothing, because all of the sound attenuation is done in that big box, the catalytic converter. So which means the only way that you can improve the sound of this bike is if you went and bought a whole system which replaces the catalytic converter, and we all know that's not road legal, so it's definitely not something that I'm advocating. But yeah, anyway, that would be for track use only. So I want to take you through some of the accessories that I've purchased for the bike and why I've purchased them. So starting at the front here, you'll see that I've gone for an aftermarket windscreen again. This one's made by Puge. Now, my height at 6 foot, I find that all standard windscreens just gave me quite a bit of noise from the wind, so I bought this one. Now this one, to be honest, is also almost a little bit too short for me, so if I go on any longer trips, I'll be looking to perhaps purchase an additional visor that can clip onto this. I've also purchased a slip-on exhaust. Now, as the sound deadening is done almost all by the catalytic converter under here, this is pretty much for aesthetic purposes only. And in addition, I've gone for a rear rack with a little seat. Now, my partner Christina, she is in the process of learning to be a passenger on the bike, and you know, she had some initial nervousness around this, and this rear seat actually really helped her to feel a bit more at ease and a bit more comfortable whilst riding with me, which is a great thing. I could have gone for the top box that Ducati makes, but instead I chose to go for this luggage rack and rear seat made by Dynamic Motor Accessories. The primary difference, the reason, is the cost. The Ducati top box, including its base plate, costs about $1,200 Australian, and that's quite a lot. And in comparison, this rear seat and little luggage rack costs about $500, which is still a lot, but considerably less than what Ducati would charge. Well, that's all for my review for now. Thanks for watching. I'll keep you up to date with any further developments I have on this bike and any additional trips that I may be taking. See you next time.